Hi everybody, welcome to our Thursday afternoon lecture. This time we're going to be discussing the classification essay, and as you can see from the attending slides, it's pretty straightforward. Basically in classification you create and describe a grouping, a category of things that are like and similar, and then you decide whether or not every individual that you're considering is going to be accepted into that group. Does it meet the criteria that you've established for a particular group? So you're creating a grouping by describing it and defining it. And it's very important to do that first, and then as you move through the categories of items, you want to see if you want to include an item in that group. It's pretty straightforward. Finally, we've also revisited from last night the concepts of induction and deduction, because they very well apply to classification systems. If you are inducting a baseball player into the Hall of Fame, you're exactly deciding that that individual player meets the criteria for all the other members and should belong in that group. Or just like if you are inducting a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame into that institution, then someone has decided that it meets all those criteria. The individual musician meets all that criteria, or an individual student being inducted into a fraternity meets all the criteria to be inducted into the fraternity. Finally, we're going to go back and look at deductions and the sequence of induction to deduction, and hopefully the slides will explain how induction and deduction are used quite frequently when we are writing the classification essay. Hope that helps. Email me or have any questions. We'll see you next week, and enjoy your weekend. The key to understanding the classification essay is that we are grouping things and ideas and creating an organization of different groups, so that we are making a list of a criteria that defines a group and deciding if an individual item or idea or object belongs in that group. So we're creating the criteria by setting up different groups or examining established groups and deciding what items are in the group, what constitutes membership in a group, and then deciding if a new item belongs in which group. The key thing to remember, look at the star, is when you are classifying, you need a major principle of classification. You have to define the classes that you're writing about. So to write a classification essay, before you start dividing members to the right or to the left, or too big or too small, or too red or too yellow or too brown, or whether it's a pyramid, a circle, or a star, you have to define what these groups are. You have to establish some criteria for making a decision about which members have certain qualities, which individual members, which individual items, which individual objects, which individual ideas have certain qualities that you would classify them as a red triangle, a yellow circle, or a brown star. The key to writing a classification essay is understanding what groups you're talking about. So if we're talking about a group of professionals and we're talking about doctors, they're going to be different from a group of professional nurses, and they're going to be different from a professional group of physical therapists, and they're going to be different from a professional group of ophthalmologists, and they're going to be different from a group of dentists. So we're really just making sure that we understand the classification system, and when we compare and contrast groups, we have to make sure we have a clear definition of what constitutes a group. The next few slides, we're going to show you some very familiar classifications that you should be familiar with. One would be the periodic table of elements. Categorized, each element is categorized by its atomic weight and listed with similar elements of similar atomic weight and properties. We're all familiar pretty much with the periodic table of elements that we use when we study chemistry. Another familiar example will be the classification of animals. And you can see here, classified into vertebrates and invertebrates, working top down. We have warm-blooded and cold-blooded vertebrates, and we have with jointed legs and without legs in the invertebrates. So you can see almost every living thing is classified and categorized in the study of biology. In the study of botany, same thing goes. We would classify plants as flowering plants or non-flowering plants. So I hope that you're getting the general consensus that what the main thing we have to do is define what constitute a group. Each group has to have a very clear classification system and a definition of what sets it apart from other groups. And then we decide on a case-by-case basis if an individual item belongs to that particular group based on its particular qualities. Key to writing a clear and concise essay on classifications is that you don't want to mix the definitions. As you can see here by this simple graphic, should explain that it's confusing to have overlapping basis or overlapping definitions of your classification system. Try to narrow the focus down so that you have one or two main ideas of what constitute a class, and you can go with existing classes or you can create your own classes of ideas, much like Roget did when he created the classification system of the English language. When you are creating a classification, it's totally up to you, and I would recommend that you look at Roget's 177 abstract concepts, seen here as an example in the yellow chart right off your D2L handout, to decide what criteria you are going to use to create your groups. Here are some examples of how you can determine whether all members listed are members of the group. Number one, autos. Economy does not belong. The other two are more specific. Transport. Train does not belong because the others are more general. And number three, rivers. Dangerous does not belong. The other two are more specific. And for drugs, illegal does not belong. The other two are more specific. In colleges, famous does not belong because the other two are more specific. In courses, math does not belong. And number seven, cheap does not belong. In development of your classification system, in either known classifications or classifications you are creating and as you conduct your research, you may want to consider a classification type by degree from lower to higher. You're going to give ranges. You're going to give numbers to ranges, and by chronological in terms of time periods. Here are some more very common examples to try to give you some insight into how we create groups and how we make the distinction of what individual item belongs to a general group. If we were going to say, let's create a group by time period of artworks, you would have, of course, the cave drawings as ancient art and the Middle Ages artwork of the knight in shining armor, and of course the modern art, the multicolored, hip, psychedelic modern art. Then also you may want to divide by time zones, and a map of time zones easily depicts how we might classify the different states and what time zone they belong in. I think it should become clear that we're all making value judgments based on what we like and what we don't like. We can group things together very simply, what we like versus what we don't like, and then when we come across something new, we decide it belongs to one of these two groups. Last night we talked about deduction. Today I want to go back a little bit and talk about induction, because when we take an individual item and we assign it to a group, we are performing the function of induction. Just like as you see in these examples, the baseball player being inducted into the Hall of Fame, he's a member of that group of the Hall of Fame players. Or a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a musician being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or a student, a fraternity member being inducted into a fraternity. All of those are examples of induction, when an individual item is assigned into a group. So that is the process of induction, when we take something specific and assign it specific qualities that are associated with a particular group. It's important to understand the sequence of induction to deduction. When you make an induction, when you decide an individual item belongs to a group, that's the process of induction. You're assigning some general principles and definitions to an individual. You're going from specific to general. You're making an individual and making it part of a group. You're going from individual to general, from specific to general. Then you can immediately make deductions about all the attributes that you've assigned to the group now applied to the newest individual. So if you have a thingamajig last night, we didn't know what it was, but if you did research and determined it was a car, immediately you could make the deduction that that car has to have all the same parts as every other car. This is a very important concept, so I wanted to make sure we reviewed it one more time before we close out, that the sequence of induction and induction is so important, because once you make an induction, you can immediately start to make deductions, assumptions about what general properties belong to the group as a whole and can be assigned to its newest member. So we go from specific to general, we make an induction, and then we go from general to specific back to deduction, and our minds are constantly doing this. We hardly even know it. It's so automatic. So our minds are constantly flipping between making automatic inductions and automatic deductions as we go through our everyday activities. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's so pervasive. So you have to understand the process of induction and deduction and how it works.